Welcome to the Sourcing Hero podcast, produced by Una, a group purchasing organization that empowers sourcing heroes, and Art of Procurement, the world's largest procurement podcast network. I'm your host, Kelly Barner. The goal of the Sourcing Hero podcast is to capture the epic stories of people who are rising up and beating the odds to create exceptional value within procurement, directly from those heroes themselves. Today, my guest here on the Sourcing Hero podcast is Kris Lance. Kris is Vice President and General Manager at Una, a group purchasing organization that provides the Sourcing Hero with its home. Kris joins me every month to tackle a current news story or topic of interest from his own point of view. So, hey, Kris, welcome back to the Sourcing Hero podcast.
Here again. Here I am. How you doing, Kelly?
I am doing great. Now, as we connect here in late July, let's do a quick temperature check. Now, we could be talking about the weather. I don't know what it's been like in Kansas City. It's been a hot summer in Boston. But let's do more of an emotional temperature or motivation check. How would you say you're feeling these days?
Ooh, well, admittedly, every day it seems a little different. Like every day I wake up, it just feels a little different. But if in a word, I'd have to say heavy. I feel heavy. Kind of like my feet are stuck in mud. Like my knee-jerk reaction was to say, "Oh, I feel tired," but I'm not tired. I mean, I'm not unmotivated. I'm not frustrated. I'm not mentally drained or like my workload's too much. It's kind of like, well, I'll use the analogy of working out, right? But it's like on a good day, right? I might go in and deadlift, let's say 500 pounds. I feel strong. I feel good. Like this is awesome. Then some mornings, I'll walk in exact same weight. I'm awake. I feel fine. But for some reason, why does that weight feel twice as much? Like I can't pull it. And so that's kind of how I describe how I'm feeling. I mean, I feel good, but man, there's some days where I'm looking around like, man, should this be so heavy? It's kind of how it feels.
Well, and it's funny too, because it's interesting you use the example of going to the gym because there is physical fatigue, right? Everybody experiences that. But there's also, like, I'll say sensory fatigue. And whether it's because of workload or stress or uncertainty or the news cycle or things going on in our families, it's possible to feel, like you said, you've had a great night's sleep, you ate a responsible breakfast, you're dressed and ready to go. And just mentally, right? There's that weight, there's that fatigue. And you and I, with the stories that we cover every month, month in and month out, there always seems to be a certain level of persistent craziness. And it never seems to end. I mean, we're halfway through 2024. COVID is way in the rearview mirror. And yet I do think there's a common agreement with the kind of feeling that you're talking about. I'd be interested to hear about the effect you either think this might be having on others, or maybe have even heard from others that this sort of emotional fatigue is having on them.
Yeah, so there's definitely an impact. And I mean, and to your point, it's like, I don't know if the WEF coined this or not, but it's kind of like that poly crisis, right? Where it's like every day there's just something. And closer to home for us in the States, right? I mean, we got $37 trillion in funded liabilities, and the larger number people don't realize is $217 trillion in unfunded liabilities. Like that's a fact. So yeah, there's crazy things going on, all which deserve their own level of focus and respect. And so, yeah, I do think all the current events are impacting people, but what's interesting is I'm not convinced, or I'm not sure that they even really notice it themselves sometimes. So like what I mean by that is, like, so for example, if I'm talking about plans, right? Like a strategic plan, say 6 months out, or a year, 2 years out, right? I'm hearing things like 2 years out, what's even 1 year look like? And it's like kind of tongue in cheek. It's not that they know the answer either, but there's kind of like that undertone of like anxiety preventing just what I would consider basic thought. So yeah, people are definitely kind of jumpy, but what I'm also seeing is well, to me, it comes off as apathy, right? Like typical responses that I would expect maybe in like 24 hours, I kid you not, are taking like a week. And I'm like, well, and it's not like staffing challenges. And I don't want to say that it is apathy, sadly, what I think it is, I think people are craving stability. Like everything is moving so fast. And so I think the form of stability is like slowing things down. Because, well, I think I saw on LinkedIn the other day, there was a post from a CEO, and he said, the happiest people I know are slowing down, not speeding up. And for what it's worth, like that's actually pretty tame from what I'm hearing or
Yeah.
seeing. Like I was telling somebody, they had said, like, oh, when's your next topic? What's that going to be on the podcast? And I was like, oh, because I told them, and I kid you not, Kelly, the response was, huh, well, is it nihilism to disconnect from a broken system? And I'm like, well, I was like, what do you mean? A system that's going to chew you up and spit you out, all while
Yeah.
trying to convince you that it's good for you. And I was like, whoa. So there are definitely some strong opinions. And I think those opinions are still being formed kind of like as we speak,
Yeah. Now let's talk about the fact that even happy workers, even top performers are starting to slow down.
Mhm.
Do you think hustle culture, at least professionally, has sort of officially come to an end?
Hmm. So is hustle culture dead? I would say no, but it's probably on life support.
Mm,
So I think kind of what contributed to the hustle culture. You'd actually want to go back a few years. I don't think this just happened overnight. And so while I don't know that it was that specifically like working from home, I think it's more simple than that, right? If we think back 4 or 5 years ago, crazy to think it was that long, but people were told, hey, sit at home for 2 weeks and don't do anything. And I think people did just that.
for
I
four and a
really
half
do.
years.
Yeah, I think they did. And so for the longest time, you've had these people, hustlers or not, right? But running
Mm,
on autopilot. And so when all that shattered, I think people were forced to ask basic questions like, hey, look, man, you've been doing this for 25 years. You like your commute? Do you like what you do? Are you happy with your outcomes? Do you like your house? Do you like who's in your house?
mm.
And so I definitely think it started this snowball effect. But so is it dead? No, I don't think it's dead, but it's certainly in a hospice setting. I think the hard workers, or the, I'm doing air quotes, great, it's different now. I would almost
Yeah.
define it differently. I don't know, it's different. So no, I don't think it's dead. I think there's still some heavy hitters out there who are trying to contribute, but you're absolutely right. I'm seeing people that even I may at once upon a time kind of looked up to. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, come
Yeah.
on. So
Well, and it's funny too, because so I'll out myself. I think of myself as a hustler. I work incredibly hard all the time. Like I have two speeds, like pegged and sleeping, right? And for me, it's never so much about, like, I don't pursue the feeling of being pegged. For me, that's not what it's about. For me, it's always about sort of the rush of accomplishment
mm,
that feeling of being pegged leads to. And it could be as small as, this may sound sad, the thrill of crossing something off my to-do list.
right.
Oh my gosh, all day long to cross one more thing off the to-do list, that to me sort of gives me this virtuous cycle of wanting to then get back into the mess and do some more stuff so that I get to get that rush again of turning something over or crossing something off on my list. And what concerns me is that it's not so much even people slowing down, but as you slow down, then the positive reinforcement either slows or stops.
Hmm.
And it worries me sort of about the cycle as a whole if everybody in some way is slowing down. To the point about that CEO that you mentioned, I work on a relatively small team, you work on a relatively small team. When you think about like a massive enterprise, and if CEOs are feeling the drag of everybody slowing down, you sort of wonder if we need an adjustment around how we lead and motivate and incentivize teams, given this sort of collective emotional fatigue that everybody's responding to.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Absolutely. I share that view. It's kind of like, well, I'll use the gym again, right? It's that physical or mental pain for a very specific trade-off. And so yeah, and it may not always be monetary. To your point, it's
Yeah.
like, how do you what makes you tick? Like, like that feeling of accomplishment. It's kind of like, was it Denzel who said one of the most selfish things you can do is something for someone else? And so, to your point, I think a lot of it is mindset. A lot of it is mindset. Yeah.
So that actually provides me with an excellent transition. When you had suggested we talk about this,
Mhm.
I think maybe it was the frame of mind I was in the day you came up with the idea. There were two sort of cultural references, very different cultural references that came to mind when I think about this idea of inertia and giving up versus what pushes you on, even if you're dragging weight. The first one, I was thrilled to know that you had also seen the movie. I'm well aware of the fact that I'm going to start dating myself with my movie references. But so the never ending story, for anybody that grew up in the window of time, I probably watched it daily for 2 years. The main character's name is Atreyu, and he and his horse get stuck in this like big swampy mud place. It's not a real setting, right? It's an imaginary fictional place.
Mhm.
They get stuck in the mud, and the mud itself is magical and makes you sad. Now, the horse, because it doesn't have the same level of intellect as Atreyu does, just literally gives up and sinks. Whereas Atreyu realizes, I'm feeling sad. This mud is making me feel artificially sad. And after giving up pleading with the horse to fight, he's able to sort of pull himself out of it and like intellectually overcome that
Mm.
feeling of emotional fatigue.
Mhm.
Do you think this is something that we can think our way out of? Is this a thought problem to your comments about mindset?
So, I mean, thinking of ourselves as like inertia is pretty awesome. I've never really considered that, but it does make sense, right? Because even if your internal thought processes are changing, it's likely something externally has happened, right?
Mhm.
There's something with your stimulus or stimuli that's caused it to change. So, yeah, I think there's definitely a connection there as far as what we can do mentally, or like, can you like when things aren't going well, it's like, well, can you out earn the problem? Like, can your mindset kind of outweigh the negatives? I think it's possible. I think to do that, we would want to like shed some things, and be really really focused. Real quick, I want to go back to your point on you know people kind of giving into those feelings, or like when you were talking about hard work and stuff. I think people are giving into some of these thoughts. And what I want to do is I really want to I want to caution people on it, right? When you're talking about mindset and things like that, it's kind of like excellence in like the reverse of it, where it's really I would argue it's impossible to compartmentalize this. So
Mm.
so I would actually caution people that anyone with that mindset of like I'm sinking, it's no, you better figure that out quickly, because I've seen it time and time again. It will impact other areas outside of just work or your career. And so with that, and then we were talking about, you mentioned kind of like a reward system. I think once upon a time, we as leaders, I never did this, but I think as leaders, or the thought process was that you could kind of dangle percentages in front of people, and maybe the carrot would do the work from a motivational perspective. But back to other things I'm hearing or seeing, to be clear, not necessarily at Una, just in my network.
Yeah.
But I'm seeing people look at bonuses right now and they're saying, that's it, like I'm good. And that kind of knocked me back, because normally that was, funds are the way to kind of covers all sins. But
Yeah.
what when I pressed into that a little bit further, what I ended up getting is, so we talked about, I think we did. I know I did a newsletter on Boeing, right? And so not not in great shape right now, or I'll say all of 2023, not a great year for them. That CEO's salary was north of $32 million. And so if I'm somebody who's working on the engine of a plane, making X, and the CEO is making 32 million, I think I'll say it this way. Financially, I think incentives are just so screwed up. And I think there's a lot of people making good money, and some of them are actually kind of like the least productive. And
Yeah.
those same unproductive people are actually the ones using the pivot tables to fire hundreds, if not thousands of people. And so, you got these CEOs going on LinkedIn and they're crying about layoffs. And I guess where I'm going with all this is I don't think anybody's really buying it anymore. And so for me, look, I haven't sold a business for 10x. I haven't written any bestsellers on leadership, but I did caution on this very thing, few years ago. I think it was like 4 years ago, because the writing was on the wall. Like the workforce and leadership, that there's been a growing divide and disconnection. And so you pour these poly crises on top of it. It's a recipe for disaster. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing. And so I guess for all the leaders listening, I'll land the plane here. Everyone is motivated differently. And I think as a leader, it's not your responsibility. You are obligated as a leader to connect those personal goals to company goals, because that's real motivation. And I think the companies that are able to do that and the leaders that are doing that, they're still seeing those high performers perform. So I digress. I didn't mean to go backwards on you there, but while we're talking about, I'm sinking. It's like, you gotta fix that really quickly. So.
Oh, absolutely. And it's actually an interesting reflection. I didn't read the same piece that you did about the CEO, but it'd be interesting to go back and read it. Is it self-reflective, or is it, hey, what's wrong with all you people? Right?
Yeah.
Two very different tones that could surround the same kind of idea. And it's interesting too, because I agree with you when it comes to being a leader and motivating people, especially in a distributed work environment. You don't have sort of the crutch of just peeking over somebody's cube and making sure they know that, like, oh, I'm aware of the fact that you're taking 2-hour lunches every day, or I'm aware of the fact that you're coming in late or leaving early every day. You really do have to incentivize people with more than money. There needs to be some joy. There needs to be a culture that they're a part of. But there's also an individual level of responsibility that goes with this, because I also wholeheartedly agree with the idea that something like emotional fatigue or inertia is never just isolated to one sphere of your life. So it's never just going to be, well, I'm bored at work, or I'm having difficulty at home, or I've lost interest in my hobbies. Typically, if something like that, if it's coming from within, it's pervasive and it's affecting every area of your life. And so each one of us also has the ability to impact how we're feeling. And this is what comes to my second cultural reference. So we're going to go way, way back before the 1980s to a book called Pilgrim's Progress. I actually read it last summer. It was one of President Abraham Lincoln's favorite books, just to put it into sort of historical context. And it's a very symbolic book about a guy named Christian who takes a journey, and he's trying to get to the eternal city. So you can sort of see where the symbolism of this is going. Yeah. But early in his journey, he's got on this really heavy backpack. I almost, in my head, picture like a military rucksack kind of thing. Like, this thing has weight to it. And in order to progress forward, he has to cross what in the book is called the Slough of Despond. And I remember looking that up at the time thinking, okay, I know I'm reading an older book, but just what exactly does this mean? So it's similar to the Never-Ending Story, like thick, really tough to get through. But again, this element of symbolic sadness. And he gets out into the middle, and just like the horse and Atreyu, he starts to sink. And he realizes that the only way he's going to make it the rest of the way across is by slipping his arms out of the straps of that backpack, letting it sink to the bottom of the slough, and then it lightens him enough that he can move forward. So certainly the physics of it makes sense. Right. But in this case, it's the symbolism of what's the baggage he has to leave behind emotionally, mentally, in terms of relationships, to buoy himself enough to get across. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about feeling inertia or feeling like you've lost your hustle. What are some of the things that we might shed, either literally or figuratively, to sort of lighten ourselves up and make it easier to power ourselves forward?
Ooh, so that's tough. I say that's tough because that's a personal Opportunity for myself, I'll say, is something I'm actively working on. So, the easy answer, it's true, but the easy answer is keep what you can control and let go of the rest. I say that, and as I'm saying it, I'm like, it's not that easy, dude. So
No.
I do know that it's really not. However, if you can unlock that, because there's glimpses of when like I'm doing it, like I'm really blocking out the noise, and
Mm,
it'll change how you respond to just about every email, every phone call, every news headline. What I have found is that I'll speak for myself, most stress, real stress, whether it's home or work, it's coming from unmade decisions that you have the power to make, but whether you're excusing yourself from it or you're avoiding it, that's where the stress starts to build up. So what I would do in those situations is ask yourself why 5 times, because
mm.
then you'll know what if you can do anything about it, what to set down and what to just figure out and push through. And so it seems simple, but once you get to about that third or fourth why, some hard truths start surfacing. So it's like, hey, um, I want to look at a different role at the company for 2 years, but I haven't done it. Why? Well, I'm worried I won't get it. Why? Well, because there's skill sets I've been trying to grow and I haven't grown them yet. Why? Because you've neglected it. Because you've been going home and doing
Yeah.
X, Y, and Z instead. And so I think it's easy to just say, well, just focus on what you can control. But when you stop and look at what you alone can control, the list gets pretty small, which is
It gets
often
really
often
small
uncomfortable.
really fast.
Yeah. Well, and that in its own right is a whole nother level of maybe
Yeah.
uncomfortable. So when it comes to shedding, though, you got to make sure you're shedding the right things,
Mhm.
because sometimes it's easy to shed the wrong things because they're easier to just set down.
Yes.
But that's what I would say. Yeah.
No, and I think this is interesting too, because in my mind, it comes back to the whole idea of sourcing heroes,
Uh-huh.
right? Sort of the whole premise behind the theme of this show is that heroes are everywhere.
Mhm.
They do all different kinds of things, they look a lot of different ways. Most of them, in fact, almost all of them, do not think of themselves as heroes.
Mm.
So we can be heroes to ourselves, but we can also be heroes to other people around us just by sort of being tapped into signs that maybe somebody else is, whether we're feeling inertia or not, that
Mhm.
somebody might be feeling like they've got some extra drag. What would your advice be if they feel like they're dragging themselves along, right? And they need to rescue themselves,
Mhm.
or if they see signs that a colleague, a friend, a family member, a neighbor is maybe exhibiting some of these symptoms, and there's just a very gentle, accessible opportunity to play the hero to that person?
Mm. Well, so for whether it's, neighbor, peer, colleague, just a dear friend in your network, I do have some advice, but like a lot of this, it's only going to work if you're taking it seriously. Like there's no halfway in self-care or leadership. So if you're doing any of these things kind of halfway, it's not going to work. So just don't do it. Save your time. But really, you nailed it. You actually, for all of everything that's going on, you really do need to be in tune, not just with yourself, but everybody who's going on, everything that's going on around you. So I mean, I would ask kind of basic questions, right? Like, so is someone on your team normally talkative and now they're quiet?
Mm,
They're normally like the ray of sunshine on all calls, and now they seemingly have a bad attitude. Or about, in that same vein, self-reflection. Are you feeling more tired than usual in the morning? And so, like, I know these questions, and even how we were framing this, it's like it kind of sounds like I'm a walking Zoloft commercial. Like, are you feeling sad? But 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 it's the subtle changes is what I'm going after. It's the subtle comments, because if you're going to wait as a leader, specifically, if you're going to wait for someone to come to you, or if you're going to wait for something to break, well, by then it's oftentimes too late. Now, when it comes to ourselves, I think first of all, we all need to remember, like, your competition doesn't care how you feel. I mean, like I remember being in high school, and taped to my ceiling was the phrase for when my alarm went off: get up and train while your opponent is sleeping. Like, they don't
mm,
make band-aids for emotions. Now, for maybe a more heartfelt reply, a more like reality-based reply, I would say, look, remember why you started and what really happens if you don't, air quotes, make it. Um, I will say a quote, Kelly, it stopped me in my tracks last week, and I had to do some pretty honest self-reflection. But the quote was, "You already received things that you said would make you happy. So are you happy? Are you not?" Kind of like what I was saying before, like ask yourself why 5 times and see where it takes you. But if you think, if you're doing self-reflection, you're like, no, I'm there. Like I need help. I need to get out of it. I feel like I'm in a rut, or maybe I don't feel so, rosy in the mornings. What works for me, and it's not for the faint of heart if you do it for real, but write down your why. And this is where it hurts. Then go find an image of it, and then study that image for 10 minutes. And then what thoughts and emotions come to mind? Is it excitement and passion, or is it resentment and frustration? Because your internal response to your original why you pushed off from the dock, why you were ready to do this, is probably going to be more revealing to you than you'd think. Because in some cases, have you lost complete sight of your why? Or like, honestly, has it changed? Oof, like there can be some pretty heavy reflection in there. So if you are honest about getting back on track, then like, well, do you need to get back on track where you were? Do you need to do more? Do you need to do less? And so if you feel like you're dragging yourselves along and you feel like you're really just going through the motions, ask yourself why and reprioritize your why. That's what I would recommend.
I think it's fantastic advice, and also made my heart stop, right? You've already received things that you said would make you happy.
Yeah.
It's worth the introspection. I've been doing this a really long time, and I often find that a topic picked in a moment doesn't always play 100% right when it comes time to act on it.
Right.
To me, the conversation that we've had today, as easily as it's rolled, and I think how all of these ideas come together in this moment, suggests to me that you're totally tapped in. We sort of started talking about this as a trend, that this might be something that people are feeling individually, but which is happening collectively. And so, as always, whether you find this in a podcast player, on LinkedIn, whether you got it from an email, find a way to reach out to us. Let us know if you're feeling the same things, or if you disagree. We'll take that too. But another excellent topic and conversation, Kris. If people are just meeting you today, don't know much about you, don't know much about Una, what is the best way for them to get in touch and learn more?
Yeah, well, if you're just hearing Kelly and I today, I would recommend checking out some of our other topics. This one's a little bit different. Normally, it's kind of geared more towards like current events and those impacts. So definitely check those out. But you're right, Kelly. I'm glad we did this topic, because I don't think it's like Mental Health Month or anything like that. But with everything that's going on, I think people, they need to know that you're not alone and how you're feeling. And rather than giving into some of maybe those darker feelings, like find a way, find a buddy, find something to get back where you need to be. Don't fall for the tricks of, oh, well, I'll just be lazy, or I'll just procrastinate. Like find a way to get your groove back. That said, if you did want to connect with me directly, you can send me an email. It's Kris, Kris, @una.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, Kris with a K, Kris Lance. And as always, you can go to una.com, UNA.com, and you can get in touch with me that way, or meet some of the other fantastic people at Una.
Well, with that, Kris, another great conversation. And now the clock officially starts ticking until next month's episode. So thank you so much for being back. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sourcing Hero podcast. Join us again next time for more true stories of sourcing and business heroism performed by your colleagues and peers. Look for the Sourcing Hero wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe. Finally, don't forget, sourcing heroism is taking place all around us every day. Keep your eyes open and you're bound to see it. Until next time, I'm your host, Kelly Barner. Stay well, and always remember that you can be a hero too.